Hello, welcome to another Drop Bears race recap. I've got my Everesting hoodie on today, little humble brag. And today we are out to the tight corners of Crit City, taking in a B grade race around the Downtown Dolphin. So if you know this course, you know it's got that cobbled climb right in the middle, tends to be the defining feature of this race. And it pops you out about 700 meters from the finish. So it's a really awkward one, really interesting to see whether anyone can get away on that climb or whether they're going to go to the line as a bunch. So we've got 8 laps today, as I mentioned. It's going to be really interesting to see how this group holds together. In terms of tactics, pretty big group today. So there's 52 in this field. And if you have a look through these power numbers, there's some pretty serious guys here. A lot of strong riders, a lot of sustained power, and some pretty handy sprinters too. A lot of these 15-second PBs up, over 10 watts per kilo, a couple up around 11 or 12. So going to be really hard for anyone to get away here. Could very well go down to a bunch finish. As I mentioned, the cobbled climb is the defining feature of this course. You notice that last one does come up about 800 meters from the finish. It's a 15.7 kilometer race. So going to be fascinating to see how the guys go, how they approach that final climb, and what happens. On the drop bear side today, we've got 2 riders. So first, Andy Keyte, Mr. Energizer. He did a race before this, came top 10, and then jumped straight into this one. You can't keep him down. He's super enthusiastic, just made the jump up from C grade into B grade. So going to be interesting to see how Andy goes today. And second up, we've got Damian. Huge watts here from Damian. He's a real powerhouse, very experienced racer. You have a look at these power numbers. This is 20-minute power, his sprint power. He really stacks up well in this field. So expecting him to go pretty well today. He recently set a 20-minute power PB. Second in the Tour for All around those punchy climbs of Yorkshire, which will put him in great stead for that cobbled climb here on Downtown Dolphin. In terms of the competitors, so I mentioned pretty big field. We've got one guy who should definitely be in A grade. He's a 4.6 watt per kilo guy at about 78 kilos. What are you doing? Get out of B. But we do have some really strong legitimate B graders in this race. You're going to see a bit of a pattern through these competitors. So first up, Adam Hattad. As you can see, big watts, and a good kick, over 10 watts per kilo. So expect him to be fighting out the finish. Dan Burt, similar story, some really solid results in some recent crit races. He's got a nice kick to him. And you look at these power records, and once again, up around that 4 watts per kilo and 10 watts in the sprint. So expecting him to contest the finish. Dan Fleming coming off 3rd at Crit City recently, setting his best average power there. So in some excellent form. Another one with some big power to put down. Frank from France, one of our lighter riders, only 69 kilos, but really packs a punch. 11.9 kilo watts per kilo in the sprint is the best in the field. So he's going to be a really interesting one. If he can hold on to these bigger guys through those corners and towards the end of the race, he could really be in there coming up to that final sprint. And finally, Mike Popkus, another Aussie in the field. Similar story again, big watts, big sustained power with a nice little kick. So really strong field, hard to pick a winner. There's probably 5 to 10 legit competitors in this one. So let's have a look and see how they go. So to start off, as I mentioned, 52 races. I started following Andy. I was having a chat to him on Discord. He wasn't quite sure how he was going to go, coming into his 2nd race of the evening. But he started really well, as you can see, up in 4th spot through that first few hundred meters, going well here, putting out some good power, keeping the heart rate in check, staying in that field. Unfortunately for Andy, things would start to stretch out pretty quickly. So here we are on that little kicker at the end of the first climb, starting to stretch out a bit. Andy on the back. I flicked over to see how Damian was going. He's absolutely dominating by this point. About halfway through the first lap, he was up on the front of the peloton, crushing that climb. So he was doing well. So this is Damian here on his green Tron bike, so keep an eye out for him because we're going to be talking a bit more about him as the race goes on. Back to Andy and coming down through the twisties on the first lap, unfortunately, starting to fall off the back here, and then by the time we got into the lumps, Andy was all on his own, and coming up to the end of lap 1, was off the back and was setting his own pace for the rest of the race. So no luck for Andy today, but back to Damian, and as you can see, firmly ensconced in the peloton, doing well here. You know, heart rate down to 155, so he settled nicely. And we're in a pretty big group here, so I never actually got to see exactly how many we had, but it was at least 30 holding together around the course. Got into a bit of a rhythm here around these laps. So with Damian, he's sort of nice and solid up the climb, and then when it sort of turns right and kicks up, really getting on the power. He was making up some good ground every single lap as the power up started flying up that steeper pinch. 2 laps down now, Damian's in a really solid spot, so was holding his own in the peloton, no worries at all. Great little heli shot here of the bunched group going through. I love these little details. On Zwift, we've even got cars parked here behind the screen that you could never see when you were racing, but for the benefit of us viewers at home from the helicopter view, there's those little details. I love them. Coming up to the climb again, so this would be lap 3. So you can see the sort of the rhythm Damian was getting in, coming around this corner and hitting that kicker. So 24th in the field as we go around the corner, over the top, pushing up into 3rd, and that was sort of a pattern that he'd set on most laps. We did have an interesting little spot mid-race here. So this is on the 4th lap, coming through over the climb, things really started to stretch out. It almost looked like we might have a group off the front. You can see how much it's stretched here, really spreading out this group of about 30 riders. And there was a time there where I thought, you know what, we might actually see a group get away. You can see there are some time gaps starting to open up. And if this front group had really been attentive and keen and seeing these time gaps open, there's a possibility they could have gotten away here. But I mean, you can see there are gaps there, but as we came through to the end of lap 4, you can see as a quick lap, PRs all over the field, confetti everywhere. The group did come back together, and we would see this group go all the way through to the final lap. So holding together here, still got that group of about 30 or so. But we did do some damage. You can see there are a couple here off the back, even though there is still a big group, that peloton's still holding fairly well together. So another big push from Damian. Up the hill, you can see up over 700 watts, looking really, really strong up the climb, always getting into a good position each lap, 740 watts here. So, you know, he's out of the saddle, pushing on the pedals hard, but doing a really good job holding that field. And again, another couple of laps later, 794 over this climb, looking really good. Coming into the bell lap now, so just before the hairpin, Damian's in a great spot. So, you know, the tempo really does click up in that final lap. So he got around this hairpin well, went into the final lap towards the front of the group. We did see a couple of long range attacks to start the last lap. So you can see just here in the distance, a couple of riders going off the front. I'm sort of assuming when I was watching this, that this guy was serious and not one of the lapped riders. He looks like a fairly serious guy. So I didn't get to catch who it was, but he did put in a bit of a dig here before we got to the climb to try and get away. But they did all come back together, heading on to this critical last climb. And once again, Damian, super strong, popped a feather power up here, which actually shot him right through the group, and perhaps even a little bit too far, because as we came over the top, actually shot right through the group, all the way up into first position on the road, confetti everywhere because he just did a PR up that climb. And this was the absolute critical moment of the race. Obviously not a great time to be hitting the front with about 700 meters to go, and faced with this question, you know, do I push on? I don't want to really drag everyone down through to the finish, but if I sit up, what's going to happen? Sitting back here doing my armchair analysis, probably needed to just sort of push on a bit, try and keep that power high. You can see sort of just took a pause, you know, down to 280 watts as we're sort of cresting this climb, and you'll see how quickly that changed from 14.9 kilometers, 200 meters later. Just that little sit up that Damian took ended up shuffling him back, so down into 14th position, and that's about all the riders that were left in the group by the time they got over that climb. And as we sort of push through the twisty section here, you can see things start to stretch out. So Damian's in here, but there's quite a bit of a distance there starting to form to those lead riders. And this was sort of the story of the finish of the race for Damian. So Coming into the last few hundred meters here, you can see if you're opening up their sprint here with some big numbers. And this is kind of a critical point here. If you want to be contending on Downtown Dolphin coming into this hairpin, you really got to be up here, third or fourth wheel around this hairpin, because you've only got about 150 meters to sprint once you get around the corner. So wasn't going to be Damian's day. Just caught a bit too far back here. You can see the aero helmets going off left, right, and center here, which was going to make it really hard for him to make up ground in the sprint. Did jump out of the saddle, put down some big numbers. You can see almost 1,000 watts here through the sprint. But as you'll see in the leaderboards, just couldn't quite make ground. Ended up crossing the line in 11th on Zwift, which was 6th in the grade on Zwift Power. So still a great effort. You can see in this last lap was a huge one. PRs almost across the field with the pace that the guys were setting. So a really hard, steady speed set the whole way through. These riders didn't have much of a kick left in the end. There's no double digits here in the sprint. 9.4 I think is the maximum that anyone managed to get, but it's no surprise when you look at these average power numbers, up over 350 watts for 20 minutes. These guys were absolutely hammering. So great effort from Damian. Big watts, big numbers, stayed with that front group, even as it split up, and got over the line in 6th spot. Kudos to Andy, held on, saw the race out, and finished a couple of minutes back in 23rd. As I mentioned, a recent upgrade to B, so great to see him out there and competing. And another great race from the Drop Bears. Looking forward to another race recap, and I will see you guys again soon.